all foods have three things in them. They have some amount of energy. They have some amount of nutrients. And that's where most nutritional science stops. Oh, that food had fiber, therefore it's good for you. But they miss the third thing that all food has, which is anti-nutrients. Right? And these are things that stop the food from being good for you. So it's not like a food is just either good or bad. It has some good aspects, has some energy aspects, and some bad aspects. And whether it's bad for you versus bad for me is sometimes gut bacteria and sometimes genetics. And sometimes it's just never that good for anyone, but we can eat it to survive when we need to. It's just not a great ongoing food source. And the plants make themselves not ongoing food sources because they don't want us to eat them. So the way of the calories in, calories out people, they would say, oh, you want to eat food that has no energy in it and has lots of nutrients, and they would ignore anti-nutrients. So you take a bowl of cyanide, pour a vitamin on it, and they go, great, it's got almost no calories and it's full of vitamins. You should eat that. And they're completely just missing that other thing that's in there. And no, most plants don't have cyanide, although wild cassava root does have cyanide, which is why it kills animals and pigs who eat it. Although cassava root can be good for you if it's cultivated and cooked right. So, most of the time the toxins aren't that big, but they do drive inflammation. They can suppress testosterone, and they can do all sorts of other things to just make you not feel good. And then you don't know why you have all these problems. So I think this is something that you pay extra attention to when you fast, because when you eat foods that contain anti-nutrients, you will have cravings the next day. So if your fast was rough, go back to the last meal, look through the Bulletproof Diet Roadmap. There's a list of suspect foods in the middle. Like, which of those suspect foods did I eat? Because I'm pretty sure one of those was guilty, maybe two of them. And then when you get this in, you're like, wait a minute, this food that I've been eating forever, it's not really compatible with my biology. I shouldn't be eating that, because when I do, it makes me profoundly hungry, which is a sign that it took something away from you instead of put something into you.
Yeah, that's such a great point. I want to emphasize this to our audience, particularly those who may have not kind of deep dived into sort of animal and plant-based, sort of diets. Animals have a natural defense mechanism in terms of they can just run away, right? So they have much less of these anti-nutrients, but plants, given that they're sedentary, often do have more of these anti-nutrients. And so it doesn't mean that eating all plants is unhealthy, but depending on, to your point, the type of plant and how it's prepared, I think we've become increasingly aware, in the science that, more plants aren't always better, right? And so
how dare you say that?
Well, it's an interesting thing, because I think people just associate vegetables with healthy diets, right? Like the stereotype is if you're a salad eater, it's optimal. While we know, obviously, you can eat too much, right? If you have too much kale, you can have too many oxalates. People actually get kidney stones from excessive kale and spinach smoothies, which are these anti-nutrients that you're talking about. In fact, the Hadza that I mentioned, it was really interesting when I was studying their diet. They're not eating a lot of green leafy vegetables, which everyone says. They're eating the baobab that I mentioned. They do have some tubers. So, these kind of, root vegetables they'll have berries, which are nowhere near as giant or sweet as the ones that we have. But other than that, they're basically eating meat and honey. And so it kind of questions, like, do we need to be scarfing ourselves with tons of green leafy vegetables? Don't get me wrong. I think it's probably better than eating ultra processed food and eating a Pop-Tart for sure. But too much of anything can be a bad thing, particularly when you're talking about these anti-nutrients that you've introduced.
It's when I came out with the Bulletproof Diet, the main book was in 2014, but the info had been online since 2011. And I'm like, look, there's these 5 classes of foods that are causing problems in masses of people they don't know about. So I talked about lectins. And since then, lectin awareness has gone up a lot. I talked about oxalic acid. And since then, we're finally talking about it. In fact, I went on the Joe Rogan show like 5 years ago. I'm like, Joe, here's the problem with kale smoothies. And here's how you might want to prepare your kale to get rid of oxalic acid. And then there was a little bit of an economically driven falling out, we'll say. And then about 5-6 years later, he was like, guys, I had to quit drinking kale smoothies because of the oxalic acid. I'm like, man, I told you on your show. But it takes a while for these things to become into awareness. I will tell you straight up, if you have a giant raw kale salad for dinner, the next morning, it's going to suck to fast. But if you had iceberg or some kind of colored lettuce in your salad, your fast is going to be better. And it's because of oxalic acid. It's just how it works.